Good morning, friends. Grab a cup of coffee and spend a few minutes with me, would you? I want to look at a few verses from Jeremiah chapter 48, which, as you know from your reading of the chapter, is Jeremiah's oracle against the nation of Moab. And Moab lay just east of Israel. It's interesting to me that the Lord spends an entire chapter pronouncing doom and destruction against this nation because of their idolatry and because they trusted in their wealth and because they were proud. But in the very last verse, he promises to restore their fortunes. Interesting, right? God's punishment followed by God's mercy. And aren't we grateful for the mercy of God, something we all need? Well, in 582, the nation of Moab fell when Nebuchadnezzar marched against it. He marched against her and the nation of Ammon, likely because both had rebelled against the vassal state Babylon. What do we learn about Moab from chapter 48? Well, we learn in verse 7 that he trusted in his works and in his wealth, and of course these were no protection against his enemies. Verse 7. We learn in verse 7 also that he worshiped the god Chemosh, which was no god at all, and that the time would come when Moab would become disillusioned with their God. Verse 13. In verse 9, the cry goes out to set aside salt for Moab. The idea of sowing cities with salt as a sign of their destruction is well known in the ancient Near East. In verse 10, we read about the one who is accursed. And who is that person who is accursed because he is slack in doing the work of the Lord? Likely it refers to the work of the destroyer of Moab, who is looked upon as the Lord's agent to carry out his work. But there's a great principle there, isn't it? Accursed is anyone who is slack in doing the work of the Lord. Also, we learn that Moab has been at ease from her youth. That's verse 11. Moab had never suffered the deep anguish of exile like Israel. Well, he lay outside the normal route of invaders in the Middle East, and so the nation was rarely disturbed. Again, the nation is just east of Israel, so it lay outside of the common trade routes. But notice verse 12. Moab is known for her vineyards, and here Moab is compared to wine, which has been allowed to settle down with its dregs and sediment to age and mature, to be left untouched. Well, not that I know anything about wine, but what these verses say is that the time is coming when Moab's vessel will be poured out, and those dregs or that sediment at the bottom of the vessel will be poured out, and the vessel itself will be broken in pieces. It's again a picture of destruction. But what we have here in these verses is a picture of Moab's complacency. And verse 35, all that Moab cherished is about to perish. Her religion, as well as her achievement in material things, all of it will perish. Now, there's much in these verses that we can apply to our own lives. We could talk about the pronouncement of doom, followed by the demonstration of God's mercy. We could talk about the danger of trusting in our works and in our wealth. But what I want to focus on in just a few moments is the danger of complacency. There was a need for Moab to wake up from her slumber, to realize that she needed to wake up from her complacency and her contentment, and that danger was just around the corner. And I'm wondering, as we reflect on this, if there's a need for us to wake up, for us to face reality. Have we become complacent? Well, there's a danger there, isn't there? And have our churches become complacent? I think that's something we ought to think about. It's easy for a church to become complacent, to rest on her laurels, right? To not see the need to get out of her comfort zone and reach out to others. Well, I think this gives us a warning for all of us. We want to be aware or beware of the danger of complacency in our own lives and in our churches. Now, in chapter 49, we have several shorter oracles directed at a number of neighboring areas: Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Arab tribes, and Elam. Our next video will highlight some of the verses in chapter 49 and some of the oracles that were spoken by Jeremiah against these nations. Have a great week, friends. I'll see you in a few days.